The 1970s was a period of change for DC and the comic book industry. DC was no longer the dominant publisher, and competition for space on the newsstand was fierce. This was a transition period for DC as well. Many new artists were entering the field, while the established ones were still creating meaningful work. You had some genres like fantasy and horror on the upswing, while others like western and romance on the decline. Let's take a look and talk about the best cover artists for DC in the 1970s, one of my favorite decades for comic books. Okay, let's start with some honorable mentions before going into the top 10. Dick Giordano did quite a few covers for DC in the 1970s, some of them memorable. You can say for the right or for the wrong reasons. Anytime I have the chance to show off my copy of First Issue Special featuring Lady Cop, I'll take it. Where Giordano was really excellent was as an inker. He's kind of like the Murphy Anderson of the 1960s. When paired up with the right penciler, Giordano's inks just make the work that much better. Mike Grell did a lot of work for DC in the 1970s, and you can see how much he improves as time wore on. I found his covers to be very solid. He did work on the reboot of Green Lantern Green Arrow, Superboy and the Legion of Superheroes, and the title he may best be known for at DC, and that's Warlord. Perhaps one of the more underrated series from DC during this time period. Jeff Jones did only 3 covers for DC in the 1970s, but wow, they were exceptional covers. That Dark Mansion of Forbidden Love #3 has eluded me for decades. I have never found a copy in reasonable condition at a reasonable price. Like Jeff Jones, Gray Morrow also only did a handful of covers for DC during this decade, but I liked them so much I thought he deserved an honorable mention. I also want to show a few covers he did for Sorcery because they're so great, and I don't know when I'll have another opportunity to show them. Okay, on to the top 10. Marshall Rogers didn't do many covers for DC in the 1970s, but his run in Detective is so memorable, I felt he needed to be included. It's not even a very long run, but a few of the covers in this run are considered classic Batman covers, notably issues 475 and 476 featuring the Joker. This is regarded as one of the best Batman runs in the 1970s, and it's easy to see why. The creative team of Steve Englehart, Marshall Rogers, and Terry Austin really brought Batman back to his roots. What surprised me was that Marshall Rogers also did a run of covers for Mr. Miracle, a reboot of the title in the later 1970s. Some of these were also written by Steve Englehart. These feel like books I can find in the cheapie bins, so I'll keep an eye out for them. Like Marshall Rogers, Jack Sparling didn't do many covers for DC in the 1970s. Of the ones that he did, some are quite exceptional. I'm happy to own a couple of them in nice shape, and they are for a couple of DC's horror titles in the 1970s, House of Secrets and The Unexpected. Both are gray tone or wash tone covers. I actually thought the Unexpected cover was done by Neal Adams. The one cover I'd love to own is Secrets of Sinister House #9, a classic reflection cover. Keep an eye out for this one, folks. Okay, bad joke. It's a shame Mr. Sparling didn't do more covers for DC during this time. For a long time, I didn't know who Luis Dominguez was. He's one of those artists that fall under the radar, even though he did plenty of covers for DC. The reason being is that the titles he mostly worked on are titles you just don't see that often, or perhaps are not looking for. Dominguez pretty much worked only on DC's horror titles like House of Secrets, Weird Mystery, and Witching Hour. In particular, I find his covers for Weird War are exceptional. Now, not all of his covers are home runs, but he does have a high level of quality throughout his work. One of my all-time favorite DC horror covers is Weird War #34, and for the longest time, I thought this cover was done by Nick Cardy. As you can see, he's particularly good at doing skeletal figures and skulls, something that was perhaps overdone a bit at DC during this time. In at number 7 is Jack Kirby, and I might get some grief on this one. I'm a huge admirer of Jack Kirby, and his arrival at DC in the early 1970s was a big deal. So big that they even announced it on the covers of the comic books. You never saw this done with any other artist. That being said, a lot of comic book enthusiasts were just not ready for this particular version of Jack Kirby. His Fourth World work would be groundbreaking. If you look at the characters and mythos he created during this time, it's next level. But at the end of the day, it just wasn't well received and tragically cut too short. His change in style was too much of a departure for a lot of comic fans, but the energy was certainly still there. It doesn't help as well that his earlier DC work was also inked by Vince Colletta, who often omits a lot of details. Certainly some of his work is borderline bizarre, but the explosiveness and innovation is there to explore. I have a lot of respect and admiration for artists who have range, and Jim Aparo has plenty of it. Aparo initially started out doing some remarkable covers for Phantom Stranger, which might pound for pound be the best series for covers in the 1970s. He also did a few superb Spectre covers in Adventure Comics, which he also penciled, which is another revival of that character. I'm happy to own a few of these in my collection. He would also establish himself as the primary artist for Batman, particularly in the second half of the 1970s. While I don't necessarily think his Batman covers are his best cover work, his interior pencils are certainly excellent. He also did some work on Aquaman as well, which again demonstrates the great range he had. Aparo would continue to do great work through the 1980s. There are a couple of special mentions I wanted to include in this list, and the first one is Basil Wolverton. Basil Wolverton only did cover work for one title, and that's Plop. These are absolutely outrageous. I can only imagine what went on in Wolverton's brain. The insides of the issues are not nearly as outrageous, but can be fun, with artwork by some legendary artists. You should definitely add a few of these to your collection and pop them out once in a while for a good laugh. The other special mention is Tony DeZuniga, and I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Tony was part of a wave of Filipino artists employed by DC that did some amazing artwork. I think Tony's work on some covers was particularly good. Some of the others include Alfredo Alcala, Nestor Redondo, and Alex Nino. What is remarkable about Joe Kubert is the consistency of his work. That, and I can't think of any other artist who has so dominated a genre in comic books like Kubert has for war comic books. One run of covers in particular I found very interesting is his run of the losers in Our Fighting Forces. In particular, every issue he plays around with the trade dress, incorporating the team in different ways. I was introduced to the losers in a special one-shot issue that came out during Crisis on the Infinite Earths. I have no idea why I bought it, and Kubert only did the cover, but that issue stuck with me for a long time. Kubert's other big title in the 1970s was Tarzan. Believe it or not, Tarzan at one time was one of the best-selling comic books. This was well before Joe Kubert's time on Tarzan, but his run on Tarzan is legendary. I'm lucky enough to own some really nice copies of some of the early issues. Tarzan is not very popular at all these days, and I think these can be bought for next to nothing if you come across them. Give Kubert's run a try. They've been reprinted in several different formats and are worth your time. Nick Cardy did some outstanding covers for DC in the 1960s, and he would continue to produce some amazing work in the 1970s. The dynamic duo talent of Nick Cardy and Neal Adams would continue their dominance well into the 1970s. A hat tip to a few of my viewers who commented in my previous video that Carmine Infantino, as art director, would play a significant factor in providing layouts for artists for these covers. Cardy did a great variety of covers for various genres, some of which you don't see very often, like romance. But you can probably say his horror covers were the best, and he did some pretty terrific ones in the 1970s. As a Canadian, I'm happy he managed to even do a couple featuring hockey. That's good old-time hockey right there. I've managed to pick up quite a few Nick Cardy covers over the years, and I think for quite a long time they've been ignored. But I feel they are certainly starting to become more popular as collectors are starting to realize how great some of them are. I find it fascinating that some artists just seem to come out of nowhere, and Mike Kaluta is one of them. House of Secrets number 99 is one of his most brilliant covers and absolutely mesmerizing. I want to say that a lot of his covers seem more like works of art instead of comic book covers. He did a wonderful assortment of covers for DC, mostly with a horror or kind of fantasy theme, and they are quite something to behold. One of the big titles and properties he became well associated with is The Shadow, a title that started off with a bang, but sadly ran out of gas pretty quickly when the interior pencils changed to another artist. Another title of his that has some great covers is Doorway to Nightmare. Kaluta didn't really do any superhero covers outside of Batman, but he did dabble a little bit with science fiction. Look out for some of his covers. They are still pretty affordable if you come across them. Berni Wrightson's entrance into comic books could not have been more perfect when he started penciling covers for DC in the early 1970s. This was a period of time where horror started to make a comeback in comic books, and no other artist was more suited to the task than Mr. Wrightson. His covers alone, I feel, are worth the price of admission for a comic book, and they are highly sought after by collectors from this period of time. Wrightson's work is predominantly covers, but he did do the interior artwork for Swamp Thing, a classic run of comic books from the 1970s. He managed to pencil 10 issues straight, which is the most he's ever been able to do for a single series. I'm a really big fan of his work, and I even did another video spotlighting the top 10 Wrightson items in my comic book collection. Few artists evoke emotion like Berni Wrightson, and he is one of my all-time favorites when it comes to doing cover work. If there's one quibble I have is that he pretty much stuck with the horror genre and didn't do much else, which is fine, but I would have liked to have seen him give some other supernatural characters a try, like the Spectre or Phantom Stranger. Neal Adams to me is the cover artist of the 1970s. While he was not as prolific as Gil Kane for Marvel at that time, his covers are just consistently better. He also had the range that few other artists had at that time. He could do horror, he could do westerns, and of course, he could do superhero. Seriously, the Batman covers he did for Brave and the Bold, Detective, and the regular Batman series are probably enough for me to put him at number 1. He has a number of iconic classic Batman covers from the 1970s, and some of them have become, in my opinion, a little ridiculous in terms of how expensive they are. I don't own a copy of Batman 251, but even if I wanted a really beat-up copy, it's going to cost me a few $100s. And to think of all those mid-grade copies I held my nose up over all these years. I've mentioned earlier in this video how Phantom Stranger, pound for pound, has the best covers in the 1970s. You've seen some by Aparo, one by Kaluta, and now you can see some of the ones done by Neal Adams. Issues number 10 and 12 are some of my particular favorites, but there are so many good ones in this run. I also haven't talked about the critically acclaimed run he did with Denny O'Neil on Green Lantern Green Arrow. You can certainly argue that these are not his best covers in the 1970s, but he did do the interior pencils in these issues, and they are iconic in their importance in comic book history. Definitely give these a read. Neal Adams could pretty much do anything, and he pretty much did. Like I said, whether it's Western, horror, superhero, Batman, Superman, The Flash, even Muhammad Ali, one of the greatest of all time. The 1970s were a roller coaster ride for DC, and originally I wanted to talk a little bit about the DC explosion and implosion that happened in this decade, but it's such an interesting topic that I feel it deserves a video on its own. But there you go, the greatest DC comic book cover artists for the 1970s. While some of these are definitely getting harder to find, you can locate a lot of these without too much trouble. Do yourself a favor and add some of these gems to your comic book collection. If you like this video, you can also check out one of my other videos on greatest comic cover artists over here. Until next time, read and enjoy your comic books.